Vulnerability is defined as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Can you name one act of courage that you've ever been involved in or that you've ever even witnessed that did not involve uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure? And it's a loaded question because I know the answer is no, because I've asked it thousands and thousands. I've stood in front of Navy SEALs and Special Forces military personnel and said, I want you to try hard to give me an example of courage that didn't require vulnerability. And in 10 years, I've never had a single person give me an example of courage, even on the field, that doesn't involve vulnerability. If you think you're being brave and it doesn't involve risk or uncertainty, you're not being that brave. You know how it's gonna turn out, it's not courage. And so in that moment, people go, shit, but I wanna be brave and I don't wanna be vulnerable. And I'm like, therein lies. No one wants to be uncomfortable. No one wants to be vulnerable, and everyone wants to be brave. And it just doesn't work like that. I mean, when I ask people what is vulnerability, people would say, initiating sex with my wife, sending my child out the door who thinks he's going to make the first chair in orchestra and knowing he's probably not going to make the orchestra at all, getting fired, starting my own business, saying I love you first in a relationship, trying to get pregnant after my first miscarriage. Vulnerability, it's uncertainty, it's not knowing, but doing it anyway because it's the brave thing to do. The problem is, I think, that the greatest shame trigger for men is do not be perceived as weak. And in our culture, we believe that vulnerability is weakness. So you don't have to skip too many steps before you go, hey, it's shaming to be vulnerable. And so men do two things in the face of shame: pissed off or shut down, put on a mask. And so what we're learning and what people are starting to see very quickly is you cannot be a courageous leader if you're not vulnerable. If you're not willing to have hard, uncomfortable conversations, give hard feedback, receive hard feedback, excavate issues like Charlottesville that no one wants to talk about. Like, discomfort is the great enemy of courage. Like, my motto is, we say it here all the time, choose courage over comfort, because you can't have both. And if you think you're being brave and you're super comfortable, you're not being that brave. I was so shocked to learn in the research that the opposite of belonging is fitting in. Because fitting in is assessing a group of people and thinking, who do I need to be? What do I need to say? What do I need to wear? How do I need to act? And changing who you are. And true belonging never asks us to change who we are. It demands that we be who we are. Because if we fit in because how we've changed ourselves, that's not belonging. That's not belonging because you betrayed yourself for other people, and that's not sustainable. You start to lose yourself. So I think it's hard. You have to show up as who you are. You can lose yourself in the fitting in, and you can lose yourself in the rebuttal to the fitting in. It's really hard. I mean, it's this thing that, it's a quote that is, Braving the Wilderness is all about this, starts with this quote from Maya Angelou, that we're never free until we belong nowhere. We belong everywhere, which is nowhere, which is no place at all. Which I thought was a terrible quote for many years. And I was like, why are you saying that, Dr. Angelou? But then I realized, and she says, the cost is high, but the reward is great. I think that's the thing, that I feel like I belong everywhere I go, no matter where it is or who I'm with, as long as I never betray myself. And the minute I become who you want me to be in order to fit in and make sure people like me, is the moment I no longer belong anywhere. That is hard. I mean, that's a hard practice. That's an everyday practice.
Blame. How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? I'm like, hi, my name is Brene, I'm a blamer. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? Even I'd rather it be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. It gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, this is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the na thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability, meaning that people who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we expend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings were really hurt about this. No, and talking. It's not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger, which is really hard. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships, and it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy.